All right, thank you for the opportunity tonight. My journey with explicit and direct instruction began in 2013. I'm the principal at Blue Haven Public School. I have been for the sum total now of 10 weeks. So I'm sharing predominantly my story at Barnsley Public School, where I was principal for 3.5 years. And we used explicit and direct instruction not only to improve student results, but I think more significantly to transform the school culture. And I think that's something that's not emphasised enough through the explicit and direct instruction approach. So just a little bit of contextual stuff before we do talk about the results. Barnsley Public School is a school of about 260 students. In the department, we use what we call a financial occupational educational index, and ours is 120, which means that we are a disadvantaged school. So we are so low socioeconomic and disadvantaged. We have about 11 classes and a very diverse staff that are towards the twilight of their careers, but also lots of young teachers that have just come straight out of university as well. Barnsley Public School in 2013. Fantastic students, some of the nicest kids I've ever worked with at Barnsley. There was a culture of low expectations when I first started there as principal. Lots and lots of excuses and people saying they're just Barnsley kids, we can't expect too much from them, which was disappointing. There was very much an egg carton effect, so while we had 11 classes and we worked within the confines of the same grounds, everyone was working in isolation. So there was like 11 separate little schools operating, using different programs, different approaches. What we called the choose your own adventure approach. So it was like we were giving the kids the curriculum in the form of an IKEA box, but not giving them the instructions. So there was a really varied approach to what was going on, no consistency in the approach at all. Teachers were really facilitating learning rather than activating the learning with the kids. And we notified very quickly that we were significantly underperforming. So if we look at the results, Year 3, on average, we're performing 60 points below the state average. That's across all strands. Significantly worse than that in some areas, a little bit better than that in other areas, but across the board, pretty well 60 points below state average. We were below state average in 10 out of 10 NAPLAN domains. So Year 3 and 5, across the 5 strands or domains, we were below average in all of them and significantly below average in all of them as well. So we went on the search for an evidence-based approach, and I do use that term with a little bit of trepidation because it's what I believe to be a significantly overused phrase in education. A lot of programs and approaches will claim to be evidence-based, but when you look at the research and the evidence, there's not a lot of research and evidence to support them. So we truly went on a search for what works because we needed to make some significant improvement in our students' results, and we wanted to do it as quickly as we possibly could. So we engaged with some research from the Grattan Institute about turnaround schools. We looked very closely at John Hattie's research, as Jennifer has spoken about. We engaged with documentation from our own Department of Education, and that was very clear. The research was very clear there, and that was the first introduction that we had to some of Jennifer's work with research papers like Why Jaden Can't Read. So the research was very clear that explicit instruction or direct instruction was the highest impact approach to take if you wanted to get good results from your kids. So we introduced a signature pedagogy, which gave us great consistency in the school. We engaged a consultant to work with us, and that was John Fleming. We promoted a culture of collaboration, and having that consistency in the one pedagogy across the school gave us the opportunity to do that. We implemented instructional coaching through walkthroughs and instructional rounds in the school, and we implemented a new staff role within the school called the Leader of Pedagogy. And the primary role of that person was to support teachers, to mentor them, to do demonstration lessons, to provide coaching and mentoring so that the minimum standard of quality instruction in the school was at an acceptable level from our eyes. We did work with some of Hollingsworth and Ybarra's work as well. All of the teachers worked through those documents, and also Archer and Hughes on explicit instruction as well. So in a nutshell, the explicit instruction model that we use is a gradual release model. It's heavily scaffolded at the start to support students with the learning, and then the teachers slowly take steps back and release the learning back over to the children so that they can use their creativity and higher order thinking skills. So the model that we used warm-ups across the board. So the warm-ups are previously taught content, they're fast-paced. The whole idea of the warm-ups is to produce that automaticity for the kids so that they're freeing up their working memory to use that with the more higher order thinking, problem-solving style activities that they need later on down the track. We use learning intentions and success criteria for all of our lessons. And we had an I do, we do, you do, or a modelled, guided, independent approach to all of our lessons. At the end of that, we used a ploughback to revisit the learning intention and success criteria. Now, embedded throughout that lesson structure as well, we used a significant amount of formative assessment and checking for understanding, which allowed us the opportunity to give our kids feedback at the point of error. So no kids were left on incorrect thinking because we were able to give them feedback very quickly as soon as their thinking was heading off track. So our initial observations through working through the model, the first thing it gave us was consistency. It gave us real academic rigour. So the kids were getting through so much content. There were really high levels of engagement. As I said, the content coverage was enormous. So the behavioural issues in the school, and there were some significant behavioural issues when I first started at the school, in class reduced enormously because the kids were engaging and they were feeling that sense of success in what they were doing. Their confidence went through the roof, and teachers became far more aware of their students' progress and the data that they were working with as well. So during that time, and I was at Barnsley until August of this year, we experienced what we believed was real turnaround success. So explicit instruction and direct instruction opened doors to a culture of high expectations, and that was through staff, students and parents. We had a school-wide approach to professional development. We had extensive instructional coaching from our leader of pedagogy. We had embedded formative assessment with that constant checking for understanding that I spoke about. We had continual differentiation throughout the lessons as we were able to tell the engagement by the engagement levels whether children were picking up concepts or not. We introduced tiered benchmarks for all of our children. So, for example, the department's benchmarks for kindergarten and reading initially were level 6. So we had 6 as our minimum, but we wanted our benchmark kids at 12 and we wanted our high achieving kids at 16. So we made sure we had those tiered benchmarks so that teachers weren't taking their foot off the pedal and were letting those kids really achieve the most success that they possibly could. We used data effectively and we tracked it really closely. We had a positive school culture. The parents were highly engaged in everything that we did. We had open classes for all of the parents to come in and observe lessons, to work with their children and to see how the teachers were teaching. We ran parent information sessions about how the model worked, and we provided parents with the resources to support their children at home as well. Interestingly, when I finished my time at Barnsley in July, in readiness for my introduction to my new school at Blue Haven, the number one concern from parents didn't seem to be that I was going, it was EDI staying, so which I took as a great compliment anyway. So the initial results, we removed the tail. So the number of kids that were not reaching benchmark or performing in the bottom 2 bands of NAPLAN almost vanished. To give you a snapshot, in 2013, Barnsley students were above the state average in 0 out of 10. In 2016, they were above the state average in 9 out of 10 and significantly above the state average in a lot of those. And I can tell you the one that they weren't, the teachers were not very happy with themselves. So Year 3 spelling, I believe, will be something that they'll get enormous results out of next year. By the end of 2014 and 15, 95% of our kids in kindergarten were reading at level 9 or above. 2014, it was 100%. It was a little less in 2015, and that includes kids with confirmed disabilities. So that's all children, regardless of their needs. In 2016, 85% of our kids are in the top 3 bands of NAPLAN writing. In 2016, 0% were in the bottom 2 bands. 4 years ago, 30% of our kids are in the bottom 2 bands. In 2014, Year 5 numeracy, we had 5% of kids in the top 2 bands with none in the top band. In 2016, 37% of our kids are in the top 2 bands with 17 in the top band. In 2016 also we had over 50% of our kids in the top 2 bands of all strands or all domains of literacy. And as you can see by the graph in the bottom corner there, our growth from year 3 to 5 was over 77% in that 2-year period. Even a number of those blue graphs, or blue lines, that are less than expected growth are very close to being yellow as well. So those numbers are really, really pleasing. So our trend data over time, just to give you a snapshot, writing is not included because they changed the text type or genre, but you can see the trends pretty well speak for themselves. Year 3 reading, well above state average. Year 3 grammar and punctuation, and the growth. We didn't really hit our straps, to be honest, with explicit direct instruction until mid-2014 because it did take time to train people and get people up to the standard that we would have hoped to have them. So we will look at all of the data, but really 2015 and 16 are probably the most relevant results. So the numbers do speak for themselves. So 2012, our year 3s were 73 points below state average in writing. Last year they were this year they were 13 above state average. And the year 5 results tell a very similar story. So as I said, the results are very clear with explicit and direct instruction, but the number one thing for me was that our kids started believing in themselves and really did believe that they could study hard and work hard in class and really achieve great results. We had a huge number of our kids that ended up in AAA or gifted and talented classes when they went to high school, and those numbers were significantly increased over the time since we introduced it. But I did want to finish tonight with a word from our students, so I will hand it over to the video.
I like doing warm-ups because I remember stuff.
I like when you get to do it yourself and see if you get it right or not.
I like the whiteboards because your teachers can look at your whiteboards in a warm-up and see if you've learnt the topic.
And I like it how teachers make the learning fun and interesting.